Hey, everybody, welcome to tonight's Late Night Happy Hour. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky joined tonight by Zach Kram from the Ringer. He writes about Major League Baseball, which we're going to get into, a lot of Fernando Tatis Jr., Padres, Dodgers talk, NL West, also great stuff on the NBA, and he's a researcher on Binge Mode. So we've got some nerdy questions to ask, probably nerd out a little bit around the Marvel universe and especially Star Wars.
Well, when we reached out to Zach, by his own admission, he when we said what are the sort of the things that you're into, he did list nerd culture. So this is us just repeating what Zach said.
Thanks for having me. I would not stay up this far past my bedtime for any show, so I really appreciate it.
We did not realize, Zach, by the way, we didn't realize Zach is in the Midwestern time zone. And so we always appreciate when people are staying up much later. It's like already tomorrow there. Don't tell us what happens. Yes, please don't tell us what happens. So tons of stuff to get into tonight. And it starts like the game of the night. And you probably wouldn't have thought this earlier in the season, but the game of the night tonight was Utah in Philly. Two teams that I guess you could argue, Zach, do you think they get the respect they deserve, or are they still working for it? Because you've written about the Sixers a lot over the course of the season.
I think they're getting there given the last few seasons. I think both teams are kind of in a holding pattern until the playoffs. Milwaukee also fits under this umbrella, teams that we know can be good in the regular season. Maybe not this good, especially for Utah. We've never seen this before, but I think we're still kind of waiting to see, can this style succeed in the playoffs? Can Gobert stay on the court in every playoff round? And then the Sixers, kind of the same thing. This entire process and post-process era, they've still never made the conference finals. They came really close in that series against Toronto, but I think the fact that they're both number one seeds kind of puts a chip on their shoulder for both of them.
Do you feel like right now, if you had to peg one of these teams going in a more, I don't know, for lack of better way of putting it, a better direction in terms of proving their viability as a legit contender, like a team that gets to the finals, which one do you think it would be?
I think the 76ers, just by virtue of playing in the Eastern Conference, where there are currently basically only three teams playing well right now. And I think
let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase it then, just because you're correct. Being on that side of the country gives you an automatic advantage. If they were both in the West, like in terms of just their actual talent as a team, who do you think is more credible?
Oh, I think Utah is definitely a better team. I think even if you look at just the point differential right now, which especially this early in the season, I think is a better indicator of future performance than a team's actual record. Utah has the best point differential in the league right now. Philadelphia is only number 3 in point differential in the East. So even though they have a better record than Brooklyn and Milwaukee, I think their underlying performance isn't quite there. Philadelphia is still suffering from the same problem that plagued them in the playoffs against Toronto and has plagued them for a while. They just collapse when Joel Embiid sits. He is maybe the MVP so far this year, but right now the 76ers differential from when Embiid is on the court to when Embiid is off the court is the biggest for any player in the NBA right now. And I think until they figure out how to maintain the score when Embiid is off, I'm not going to put them on the same level as these other contenders.
But like the Embiid thing is interesting to me too, because like he says every year, and tonight he was pretty good. He had 40 points, 19 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, 10 of 13 from the line. He was a plus 10 in an 8-point win. He's one of these guys who every year says, this is the year I'm going to be serious. This is the year I'm going to get in shape. This is the year I'm going to do all the stuff that superstars do. And this actually does look like the year he's doing it. So how likely, what do you think a fully motivated Joel Embiid looks like in the playoffs? Because I'm not sure we've ever really seen it.
I think we kind of saw it to an extent in 2019 when they won a round and then went toe-to-toe with the Raptors. The difference is, I think, even then, he still had games where he would play really well for 3 quarters, but have that 1 quarter where he wasn't quite able to sustain that production. And this year, we're not seeing that, in part because if he's maybe feeling tired or his shot isn't on, he's getting to the rim and getting to the free throw line more than anyone else in the league. And I think that's such a factor that just helps you kind of quell against off nights, that as long as he's able to maintain that level of production and just getting to the line, that's an extra 10 points a night. And I think that's kind of the differentiating factor for him between this year and other years, is just that ability to get free points when he needs them.
I think it's really interesting when you look at Embiid with the Sixers, like the idea that they're the one team in the league that's really trying to, make a case for themselves, get to the finals, being built around a big man that truly is a big man, and doesn't really function in a lot of ways as anything other than a big man. Like, Anthony Davis is a hybrid. Nikola Jokic obviously he's like a classic big man in a lot of ways, but he also can be used in so many different spots around the floor that he's got a little bit more of a hybrid type feel than Embiid, even though Embiid can be on the outside. Like he's much more of like a traditional big than I think any other team around the league that considers themselves contenders is trying to do, like in a very wing guard dominated league.
Frankly, I think you can almost strip the contender aspect out of that. Who on a non-contender is a back to the basket big like Embiid is right now? I'm not really sure there is one. Zion Williamson was playing like one, except now New Orleans is using him as the ball handler in a dozen pick and rolls a game. I think even a big like DeAndre Ayton for Phoenix looks like Embiid. He looks like he could occupy the same role, but Phoenix isn't using him that way. And I think that's what makes Embiid so different. And I kind of enjoy that as someone who really enjoys stylistic diversity. I miss, the grit and grind Grizzlies just because they were different from how other teams played. And I like that Philadelphia and Brooklyn and Milwaukee and Toronto, if, those are four of the teams that come to the end in the East, all give really different styles. And so I'm glad that Embiid exists like this. I'm glad that Ben Simmons exists as just a different kind of tool than we see for any other team.
Brian, really quick, just because I want to ask directly related to something Zach just said, just because of the age that you're at. You're in your mid-20s, which means that you grew up watching a lot of what's, essentially this generation of basketball, like, this style of basketball, very pace and space, very spread out, 3-point driven, guard driven. And you were talking about that, stylistic variety that you like to see just that comes with the Sixers. From your perspective as somebody who grew up on this, do you feel like the NBA has enough variety to it, like to keep you interested as a fan?
I think yes and no. I think the no is there are a lot of 3-pointers, and I've written that this year more than ever before, just whether you're accurate or not from 3 really is dictating the results of games more than ever before. Like teams that are making at least 50% of their 3-pointers in a game are basically undefeated, and there's not much as a defense you can do to prevent that. But I think if you watch a lot of games, teams still approach how they get 3-pointers differently. If you watch Golden State versus Portland tonight, another great game, Curry and Lillard are very similar players, but they occupy different offensive roles in terms of how much they play off ball versus, holding the ball more of the time. A term that the Athletic Seth Partnow uses that I like is heliocentrism, just revolving around one star. And I think a lot of teams that shoot 3-pointers still get there in different ways. So if you watch it closely, I think there are different facets to appreciate from a lot of these teams. But I think you're right, the end result is kind of homogenous.
Oh, but there's still, but there's still a little bit of it. Like the Lakers last year were not a particularly prolific 3-point shooting team. They didn't take a ton relative to the rest of the league. They certainly didn't make a ton, certainly not until the bubble and the playoffs, really. But they won by playing really good defense and going downhill and dominating in the paint and different, like not with classic post-up play, but like their thing looked different than a lot of other teams did. So there still is space, but I do think you're right that the diversity comes from what the stars look like. And like, it's like I love watching a team built around Nikola Jokic. Like that's a different thing than a team built around LeBron, which is it's built around Steph Curry. And like the debate is always, you have to have X to win. This type of thing can't win or whatever. And the NBA right now seems to be like a great lab for what kind of stars can win. That's part of the reason I'm pulling for Philly, because I'd love to see Embiid and Ben Simmons be able to do this, because so much of they can't do it in the playoffs because Ben Simmons can't shoot, or Embiid is too much of this or that. So there is that kind of diversity that at least gives you an idea of, what, at least within the stars, it seems to me.
And it's funny how quickly things change. It was just 6 years ago that if you were pulling for a team to win, to prove that its style could succeed, you were pulling for the Warriors to prove to the old guys that actually, yes, a jump shooting team can win the NBA title. It's funny talking about like my age and the teams I grew up on. The first team I loved was the 7 seconds or less Suns, because in that era, they stood out, even though right now they kind of set the stage for a lot of the offenses we see now.
It's crazy, and this is apropos to what was going on today with the reaction to Candace Parker and Shaquille O'Neal debating like pick and roll coverage on yesterday's TNT post game. Like looking up those 7 seconds or less era, like 2006, the year that Shaq won with Miami, the Suns led the league with something like, I don't know, 25 3-pointers a game. That wouldn't even qualify for last in 2021. Like you would be like the 34th team in the league now. For real. Like it's crazy though.
You're behind the Rio Grande Valley Vipers or whoever's still playing.
You would not qualify for last the way the league is run right now.
Steve Nash is a 43% career 3-point shooter, basically where Steph Curry is, and he took less than half as many threes. I think he's talked in retrospect, I should have taken more. And obviously we see with Brooklyn now, he's encouraging that as the coach. But it is one of my favorite pastimes is like to go back to the early aughts and look up the scores of those games, especially before Nash went to the Suns and they didn't relax the defense rules, and you would get like 69 to 65 playoff games. Amazing.
The two things about that, like my giant takeaway from The Last Dance, other than holy shit, I kind of forgot how good Jordan, like young Jordan, was, especially. Also, I forgot that Jordan's old enough that he started at North Carolina with no 3-point line. And then the third thing was like exactly what you're saying. You get to these clutch classic fourth quarter moments in Indiana, this and that, and the score is 87 to 82. And it reminded me, I hated the watch. I didn't watch the NBA in the 90s and stuff because it was kind of an unwatchable product. Like I think basketball is way more interesting and more exciting and more athletic and all this stuff now than it was, even when you go back and watch those, the Kobe Pau teams and how much everything is inside the 3-point line. It's amazing to see how much they could still move the ball and do things. But I just feel like I feel like today is more exciting and interesting to watch. Maybe it's because I didn't grow up watching a ton of basketball in St. Louis as a kid.
Frankly, I think it's just getting started, barring any rules changes, just because you think about who the best middle and high school players now are watching as they grow up. They're watching Steph Curry and James Harden and Damian Lillard. So as guys like Trae Young and LaMelo Ball come into the league, they are entering with skills that even it took a while for Curry to shoot as much as he did for the Warriors. And I think over the next 5-10 years, guys are going to enter the league saying, yeah, I can shoot 8 3-pointers a game and take step backs from 35 feet. So I think we're really just seeing the first generation kind of molded on this style of basketball and could really change it even more. I'm kind of excited to see what happens.
When you say change it more, like what comes to mind when you're envisioning basketball in 2031?
I think one of the biggest kind of nuances of the 3-point revolution, I just mentioned Trae Young and LaMelo Ball, but one of the biggest changes is at the 4 and 5 position with forwards and center shooting threes. Even someone like Embiid, who are talking about as the most traditional big in the league now, is still taking a lot and making a lot of threes. So I think talking to like my colleagues at the Ringer who pay more attention to draft prospects, they say basically all the top center prospects now can shoot threes. So I think when they enter the league, it just will require less of an adjustment period, where a lot of the bigs now, someone like Brook Lopez, who's now a stretch 5 in Milwaukee, took a lot of years as a post big to then transform into what he is now. if you don't have that first decade where you're a post big and you just enter the league when you're at your most athletic and you're able to shoot like that, I think the game could get even more wide open potentially in the next decade.
Yeah, and there are guys with the skills to do both. It's not like Embiid doesn't know how to play in the post. And he's not taking quite as many. He's not as three happy this year as he has been. But like it's like to watch Karl Anthony Towns, shoot at volume from three, run the floor. Almost like these people are freaks. Like, why would you want to just be? I guess because your dad played that way. Like, why would you want to take a guy that skilled and that athletic and only make them do one thing? I don't get it.
It reminds me of like even at the levels of youth basketball when your best player does everything regardless of what his size is, just because the skill differential is so big. But then the traditional path has been, okay, as they get to like the high school level or even before that, it's a matter of pigeonholing them to win, right? If you're 6 inches taller than everyone else, we'll just give you the ball back to the basket and you turn around and shoot. But I think if guys see Steph Curry and see Karl Anthony Towns and see Anthony Davis and say, I want to play like that, they'll be able to develop such a more diverse skill set, like you're saying.
Brian, if memory serves, when we talked to Shea Cotton on this show, everyone knows him as the man-child. He was like this incredible, expected to be preps to pros prospect. He was supposed to be LeBron before LeBron existed. Didn't he say something like that happened to him in terms of like him being at the time so much?
I don't remember, but I know it's very common.
Yeah,
and now today it's the opposite. Like you say, like guys just you were encouraged to do all this other stuff, but then also too, Zach, I think it's just like players, like you say, you're watching Karl Anthony Towns. So if you're a big, you're like, oh, I can do that, and I can face up. I don't have to play with my back to the basket. That's boring. I can do all the same shit guards do. And if you work on your handle, you get the benefit of being the best player on the team and having the ball in your hands and all. Then you grow to be 6'9". And you still have the handle. That's what happened to Anthony Davis. So,
right.
I mean, that's why these guys are the best athletes on the planet. I mean, it's insane.
It's kind of, I think it's almost a self-perpetuating cycle that way, because as more guys enter the league playing like that, then the generation behind them even more says, I want to play like those guys. And like, who is the post big now that a young player is going to watch and say, I want to develop that way? Of course, like you said, guys still have post moves, but it's not like 10 or 20 years ago when you might grow up and say, oh, Shaq is really great, I might want to play like him. Even if you say, I want to play like Joel Embiid, first of all, good luck, developing his physicality.
Right.
But second of all, that still means shooting threes, and that still means being nimble, guarding on the perimeter. And I think it just makes for a much more athletic game, 1 to 5.
It's just insane to think that it's a person as large as Joel Embiid can move the way. Like, this is why I tell people, like, if you can afford a ticket to get near an NBA court, you need to go do it, because you don't understand what this is until you see these guys moving in real time up close. It also reminds me that when we had Ben Taylor on from Thinking Basketball, he was breaking down, we were talking about him and Olajuwon and the Rockets that year. They were spacing the floor with, I believe, 8 3-pointers to take advantage of Olajuwon's the gravity of Olajuwon in the post. All right, so after the Utah game, which was, we saw in the Laker game yesterday, correct? It was Devin Booker who got teed up real quick twice and was thrown out of the game. Tonight, it was Donovan Mitchell who got thrown out in the overtime portion of the game against Utah. And afterwards, I have not seen this. You guys have seen the comments, so I'm excited to watch this from Donovan Mitchell.
To win, things got a little chippy. Just how frustrating is this one for you?
First of all, I've got to, give 76ers credit. They played a hard game. Joel does what he does, and at the end of the day, they're a good team. We competed, but it's tough. KK, like, it's tough to go out there and see how we fight and compete, and to have a game like that taken from us. And I'm never ever one to blame a ref, to blame an official. I could say we could have done more, but this is getting out of hand. There have been games like this that we've won. There have been games like this that we've lost. But this whole refereeing stuff, and the way we're nice, we don't complain, we don't get frustrated. We fight through things, and the fact that we just continually get screwed in a way by this. We won this game. in my personal opinion, But like I said, I'm gonna give them credit. They won, whatever, cool. But like it's a consistent thing, and the question is, can we do it? Can we sustain it? Are we for real number one? Like, yeah, the hell we are, and it's getting ridiculous, KK. That this is what's happening. You know what I mean? We have a whole second half of the season to go and get ready for, but like I'm sick of it. To be honest with you, we all are. And I think this is something that just it eats me. It eats at me, man. And I don't. Y'all know what it is. We all know what it is, but it's really getting out of hand.
I actually don't entirely know what it is. The theory here is that the league is conspiring to hate the Jazz. I don't know, but I love we won this game in my personal opinion. I don't think they did, but
I love we won it in my personal opinion, but I don't want to take anything away from those guys, except of course for the victory that they actually recorded officially. But I don't want to take anything away from them. I just feel like we won. Other than that, though,
this is becoming. It was a problem 2 or 3 years ago for a totally different reason, which was they were getting too many calls that were then being reversed on the next day, and they were issuing all the opinion. Where is the NBA with referees and all this, and how much do you think is actually just related to the fact that now referees can hear literally everything these guys are saying all the time?
When I think about referees and controversy, I kind of separate in my mind the in the moment calls. Is that a block or a charge? Is that a reaching foul? Because those are really difficult to make when you have guys moving this quickly, this big. It is really difficult to make those calls. And I think absent like very strong evidence, I'm not going to be upset about that. I don't mind Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert being upset about that. They just competed hard and lost a close game. Let them blow off some steam if they want. But I think from the outside, I'm less concerned about the actual quality of those calls than I am the calls that aren't specifically in the moment, the ejections, the technical fouls, the fact that you see this great Lakers-Suns game, and then all of a sudden one of the star players in that game is ejected seems kind of like the referee inserting himself where he shouldn't. And I would much prefer a dozen ticky-tack iffy calls on block charges over an ejection of a star player when he doesn't belong. This happened in the playoffs last year. Kristaps Porzingis was ejected and kind of turned one of those Mavericks-Clippers games in that awesome first-round series. And I don't think that ejection was warranted in the slightest. And I think that's where the NBA has more of a problem. I'd also tie that into replay reviews. I think the fact that you get close to the end of a game and then have all this momentum building up and this tension in the air and then spend 5 minutes looking at 35 replay angles makes it difficult to maintain that tension. So I think solving those stoppages from the ejections to the replays is more of a concern and probably more doable, because you're never going to make it so that a block charge call is easy, but you can instruct the refs to stop giving out technicals. You can alter the replay system a lot easier than that, I think.
You know what's interesting, Brian? You just said that, and we've talked about this before, and I know others have as well, like the idea of the refs can hear things more now from players that they wouldn't be able to in normally crowded arenas, and that makes them, more rabbit-eared, more hyper-aware of it. But I wonder also, too, and this just occurred to me, how much of this actually could have to do with refs feeling like people watching these games, whether, say, like the 2,000 people inside an arena or on TV, can actually hear this stuff more. And it's like, no, I'm not going to let you show me up in a way that before I could maybe blow off or ignore, because not everybody knows exactly what's being said. But now that I know people can actually hear this, like it really starts becoming like a respect issue or a pride issue.
That was, I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago in baseball when there was leaked audio of Aaron Boone reaming out the home plate ump. Yeah. And everyone said, oh, that was so cool to see how the manager actually interacts with the umpire. But then MLB said, we don't actually want this that often unless it's tightly controlled, because we don't want this audio out there. It's embarrassing to our umpires. So I think there might be something to that idea. I'd be interested. This would never happen unless you get like an anonymous truth serum sort of thing. But
Right.
I'd be curious to know if that's a possibility.
So I think we're all so much better off. Andy, you tweeted about this the other day. Like the amount of shit that we get to see and hear and learn now, like every single time Russell Westbrook drives, it finishes with "goddamn."
Every single time. Every time. It's "God damn it." God damn.
And those like individual quirks are really fun. Think of Sheed yelling "ball don't lie" or Melo yelling whenever he gets a rebound. Those are fun quirks about some of our favorite players.
I like, you know which one I like a lot is hell no, when somebody's taking a shot that the other team doesn't think.
The disrespect.
Well, we learned actually, Brian and I, because we covered the Kobe Powell teams, that went back to back, went to 3 straight finals. And because we were at all of these home games over and over and over, like I learned, I think Brian will remember this, every time Kobe drove to the basket, wanting contact, it would be, hey! Powell, every time he drove to the basket, wanting contact, it'd be, ah! Lamar Odom, every time he drove, wanting contact was, oh! Like you would learn every single tick these guys had or every single mechanism that they were trying to use to get the refs on their side. But now just it's all of it. You also came up with something, Zach, like the truth serum concept. I would love to have truth serum after every game. Like if these guys had to take truth serum and then answer our stupid questions. That would be amazing.
Well, I mean, even just for the referees, which is what I was thinking of, is you get these really kind of sanitized 2-minute reports and these ref statements that basically say, yes, we agree with the call that was made. And I'm not sure how much we're really learning from those. The next day, 2-minute reports, I guess we learn more a little bit, but I don't know what this is going to say about the Utah-Philadelphia game, for instance.
Great. If the referees afterwards, in the pool, truth serum. Yeah, my colleague is a dipshit. He gets these calls wrong all the time. I can't stand working with him. Like, oh my God, that guy is a snowflake. You can't say a word to him without getting teed up. Frankly, it's embarrassing. Like that would be fantastic. Like really just learn what all these guys think.
I was a ref for intramural games in college, and the only times I ever was reprimanded by my supervisor was because he said I didn't give out enough technical fouls. He said I needed to do that more to keep the game under control. And I said, like, I don't want to call technical fouls on these guys. I don't want to influence the game in that way. And I think I would prefer the NBA refs, of course, in a completely different situation to kind of occupy that same mindset and say, do we really need to eject Devin Booker right here? Like in the third quarter.
It's like it's time. It's like the league needs to tell these guys, this is a national televised game. Short of him coming up and like slapping you with a white glove, like do not throw Devin Booker out for a technical, like for a language technical. Do not do that. Like you can't.
And that's where I think you say you want, everyone should be refereed equally. And I agree with that in principle, but in practice, I and probably a lot of viewers get more upset when Devin Booker is ejected from that game than if a reserve had been ejected from that game.
Absolutely.
So I think that's where understanding the context actually is useful for the referee. Let the star get away with a little bit more. He deserves that.
Like LeBron should be able to like MF, motherfuck a referee right up to the point where it's just like literally too much. Anthony Davis, all these, like if you've made 4 all-star teams or 5, like there should be rules about this kind of stuff. And, not every player gets treated on the same on every team. It should be the same way on the floor.
Well, this adds an interesting wrinkle, by the way, to a piece that Zach recently wrote about Mike Conley and the idea of whether or not he is the best active player who's never made an all-star team, but could possibly end up the best player, period, to never make an all-star team. And you went through active players, non-active players. Like this could be, if we're looking for the thing that, that gives Mike Conley that edge, like finally he can discover the way to make an all-star team. It's the ability to MF these guys with impunity. Like if he can finally figure out that formula.
I like that idea, kind of like a lifeline, maybe, where every all-star game on your resume is like one extra lifeline you get. So if I have three all-stars on my resume, then maybe I would have to get the equivalent of 5 technical fouls before I get ejected. That's a concept they should explore.
Or you can pick somebody like on your team, like LeBron gets his second technical. He can look at Alfonso McKinney and tell him to go take a shower.
Kind of the reverse of when like someone gets injured and the opposing team gets to pick who shoots the free throws.
Exactly. I just like rules like that. Like I'm okay with it. I'm like, and this gets to the All-Star thing. Like I'm okay with Mike Conley, who I really wanted to see make the team, and who knows, he might still, because Kawhi Leonard might, that back injury might keep him out, and who knows what's going to happen with 2 or 3 other different players around the league before Sunday rolls around. But like Mike Conley, I'm okay with him taking somebody else's spot because he deserves to make an all-star team. Like how dogmatic are you? You wrote the whole thing about is Conley the best player ever to not make a team? How dogmatic are you about this idea of like always the best player in this half of the season and so on and so on and so forth?
So I actually think Conley deserved to make it just by his play this half of the season, playing so well for Utah, and his advanced metrics are off the charts.
Right.
I also think that this is where we're talking about the league has to remember that this is an entertainment product. And when it applies to the All-Star game, I think that goes even beyond Conley to something like, okay, Chris Paul deserved to make the team this year. I think Chris Paul, even if you don't like put on his resume that every season from now on is an All-Star appearance unless he earns it, I think he should be able to play in the All-Star game forever, because he just makes it more fun with his ability to pass to everyone the same way. Right. That was the case for John Stockton.
It's like if you win a Masters, you get to play in every Masters until you die.
Yeah, there should be some sort of. They actually did this for, I think, Wade and Nowitzki a couple of years ago, their final seasons. Mm-hmm. But acknowledging that there are like a couple point guards who are just extraordinarily fun and deserve to be in every All-Star game because they make that more fun. And I think it's this kind of thing that, yeah, it's small and doesn't matter that much, but it's just a reminder that this is an entertainment product and is important for the viewers to maximize that.
Also, go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say, your piece reminded me of something I felt for a while. I've talked about this before. They should get rid of the West and East distinctions for the All-Star game. Just bring in the players that are going to make it the most fun, because this is just a glorified exhibition and showcase. And if you want to have a glorified exhibition and showcase the most fun. Like, frankly, make people forget that the East even exists. Seriously, why remind them?
Looking at the list of point guards who have made it over Conley over the last decade during his best seasons, it's like, yeah, I kind of understand why he hasn't made it now, because it's Curry and Lillard and Westbrook and Harden. And yeah, Conley's a great player, but is he better and more famous than those guys? Probably not. Whereas over the same span, Jeff Teague made it in the East, D'Angelo Russell made it in the East. And that's not to take anything away from them. They're all-stars and they deserve it. But I imagine Conley would have a couple all-stars on his resume if Memphis, which, by the way, is in the eastern half of the country, had been in the Eastern Conference that time. And like you say, the fact that they're drafting teams now and it's not even East versus West, I'm not sure why that conference split for the roster persists.
That's the part that I think is really, because I love that they pick teams, although I think they should do it live on television. If you're going to do it, really get the most out of it. But as long as you're doing this, you're right. There's no reason to have conferences for this. It's stupid.
And yeah, like the fact that you have, Team LeBron versus Team Durant this year, and you're going to mix up the conference anyway. I'm not sure anybody would be counting and saying, oh, Conley's there, so that's 13 Western players split between these two teams. It just, that's silly.
Yeah, you want to generate, you want to generate the most fun possible, but also too, like for somebody like Mike Conley, or, this was something Brian and I dealt with when we were covering Lamar Odom, and there was a year, it was the year that he won Sixth Man of the Year. There had been like a push for him to make an all-star team, and he ended up not making it. Like Pau Gasol actually made it that year. And that particular year, both of us actually thought Lamar deserved it over Pau, but Lamar was really disappointed. Like, he was a good sport about the whole thing. He was classic because that's just how Lamar was. But like, this is one of those things that like you only get, unless you are a superstar, you only get the opportunity to make this happen so many times. And, you know, for guys like LeBron, I'm sure if you I mean, actually, I don't even have to ask him. He's said this thing is a pain in the ass for him. Like, he doesn't really want to go. He's made it clear. Like,
clear.
Yeah. But for somebody like Lamar or, you know, Mike Conley or Jason Terry, who was high up on the list of your thing, like, even just making it one time to be able to say that they were an all-star, I'm sure would actually mean a lot to them, especially if they knew that they earned it that year, that it wasn't just like a token thing.
Yeah, I think that earning is important, and that applies to Conley this year. I was not advocating for Conley to make the All-Star team last year because he wasn't playing well. He was having difficulty adjusting to his first season outside Memphis, and you don't just give it to a guy. But I think using it as sort of a tiebreaker, I thought Conley should have made it this year anyway, but even if he was on the fence, I think that can nudge a guy forward because at some point, all these guys have such similar resumes anyway, and it's really hard to distinguish between them, especially a season like this one where guys are missing games. And how do you balance someone who maybe has slightly better statistics, but a few games missed because of COVID protocols? And it's kind of a mess all around anyway, that I would have been perfectly fine if they used it as a tiebreaker, especially once Anthony Davis was out and you were using it as a replacement spot. He would have been a perfect fit for that, I think. To take nothing away from Devin Booker, to quote LeBron, the most disrespected player in the league, including, I guess, coming full circle by the refs last night.
But like, so you would just keep Booker off, or who, all things being equal, would you put Booker in over Paul? Or
I think I would have put Paul over Booker. I think he's the leader of that team, and I think it's not necessarily fair. Like, I would put Booker over a guy or two in the Eastern Conference, but like we're saying, if you're limited to 12 guys, and that's the other thing. Why is it still limited to 12 guys when active rosters now are above that? I wrote in my piece that you talked about how all-star roster sizes have remained the same even as the league has expanded. So just by virtue of the number of teams and players in the league now, it's harder to stand out and make an all-star team. So I think they should expand to 13 or 15. And yes, you would still have arguments about the 15th guy as opposed to the 12th guy, but that would ease the arguments for the guys at the top.
Thank you. Because I mean, I would imagine the biggest reason the league would be reluctant to expand it from 12 to 15 is they'd worry that we wouldn't have these debates, and these debates are the lifeblood of coverage. Like, all Adam Silver needs to do is spend 5 minutes on NBA Twitter. I can promise you we are not going to stop arguing.
It's not like we stopped arguing about bubble teams when the NCAA went from 64 to 68.
You can expand the roster to 25 players per side. I promise you there will still be people arguing about this shit all day. It's what we do.
People argue every year about the snubs from the rookie sophomore game. So yes, I think we'll be able to find some arguments for.
I saw that like on NBA TV today, and I think it was a little bit tongue in cheek, but they were having a sort of mini debate about whether or not Sadiq Bey was unfairly snubbed from the All-Star or from the rookie sophomore game that they're not even playing. It's just being named to it.
I'm not sure, like, does that even show up on your basketball reference page? I don't even know. It's such a limited honor compared to everything else.
I'm not even sure you get like the bumper sticker they send you for like when you win player of the month. Like it's like my son was player of the month in the NBA, like the bumper stickers that you see from elementary school. So yeah, I mean, that's Andy and I are pretty indifferent about a lot of these. I mean, we're not big all-star game people, but for somebody like Conley, it becomes important because these are like for guys who may not win a title. All this, like how many all-star teams you make ends up influencing. Are you a Hall of Famer? Are you not? Like it can matter probably more than it should. And maybe hopefully going forward, it won't matter as much, but as long as we're going to treat these things as important, whether or not you make these teams, you got to figure out ways to get more guys on.
Sometimes it affects bonuses. I mean, it can actually affect your money.
And that's why I think, it does need to be taken seriously for that legacy purpose, not just handing out token appearances to guys who don't deserve it. But like I say, I think if you're on the cusp, to be able to use it as a tiebreaker is, I think, valuable just in the same way that a lot of voters will use team record as a tiebreaker. I don't see it being that different when you need something to differentiate between the final candidates.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So I want to get to Fernando Tatis Jr. before we're done, because you've written about him, and he is, I think, a monumentally important figure for baseball going forward. So I wanted to get to that before we're done, but we also want to talk a little bit of nerd stuff. And because you are a researcher at Binge Mode, which is like the ultimate nerd deep dive, like intense thing into whether it's, you guys have done, give me the sort of the list. You've done Star Wars, you've done Harry Potter, you've done Marvel. What else? What am I missing?
Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Game of Thrones, the big one. Yeah.
Let's start with Star Wars. That universe, like, if people don't remember, I forget the exact number of TV shows that Disney Plus is going to be putting out over the next few years around the Star Wars universe, animated and live action. But it's something like 20, isn't it? It's an astronomically large number.
I think it's supposed to be around 10 Star Wars and 10 Marvel, so about 20.
Oh, maybe maybe I'm combining the two. All right. Why does Star Wars, and then to that degree Marvel, why do these things translate to television so well? Because the Star Wars TV series, whether you're talking Mandalorian, my kids like Clone Wars, it's really well done, and all these other things, generally speaking, are way better than the movies.
It is funny when you think about how Star Wars is the most important probably movie franchise in the country, and of the 9 core movies, maybe like 4 or 5 of them are good. It's not the best hit rate.
Maybe. Yeah. Which ones do you think are good? Like legit good?
I would say all the original 3 are good. I was a huge Last Jedi fan, which, the internet might feel differently. And I think Force Awakens, I really liked when it came out, and probably because it was the first good Star Wars movie of my lifetime. But then on retrospect, in viewing it again, I see a lot more flaws. But I think the point you make about the television series is fascinating, because I think one of the reasons for all of these universes, so to speak, is that it just gives you ways to explore the world in more detail. And what I mean by that is, in the Star Wars movies, take the original trilogy, you basically went in the entire first movie to a couple different planets. If you take The Mandalorian, you can go to a planet every episode. And I think that allows you to delve into these rich worlds more. And I think a lot of the fandom on the internet is devoted to exploring these worlds. If you look at like the Star Wars Wikipedia, called Wookieepedia, of course, because that's a great pun, they have all of the canon universes cataloged. They have the expanded universe cataloged. And I think people just love exploring these worlds so much and developing the new details that weren't there in 1977. But the fact that The Mandalorian can combine the traditional like Easter eggs that excite fans, but while also showing new things, is partly why the show succeeds so much.
But I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't follow any of that stuff. Like I don't get deep into the Wikipedia. I don't know the worlds. I don't know, but it's just, they're better. Like my list, start the original, New Hope is good. Empire is great. Return of the Jedi is half of a good movie. And yes. I think Rogue One is excellent.
Oh, I love Rogue One. I wasn't counting that because I was just thinking about the core 9. I love Rogue One.
Yeah, I think Rogue One is great.
Technically speaking, the Rogue One.
No, but I think that comment actually explains why this show is so successful, because you can say, well, I don't follow any of this stuff, but I still enjoy the show, probably because, I don't know, the action is cool and Baby Yoda is fun. And then you have the binge mode audience that loves the Easter egg stuff. And the fact that they're able to simultaneously cater to both of those groups is, I think, A, what makes it successful, and B, why they're expanding it so much, because they can keep doing that repetitively, iteratively over and over again.
And you don't have to cram it all into one movie. Like, I think this is part of the problem. And my kids, I've seen all the Marvel movies because my kids watch them over and over again. And they're generally good, but they often get very overstuffed, because I think there's this tendency to feel like you have to put every character, as many as you possibly can, in every movie, which takes a movie that should be an hour and 40 minutes and makes it Age of Ultron, which is like 4 hours.
Yeah, and you get on the TV side, you also have the variability to be able to play with episode lengths. Like you're talking about, you can have a 30-minute episode followed by an hour-long episode followed by another 30-minute episode. You kind of have the flexibility to fit the length to the story as opposed to having to fit the story to the length.
The Easter egg thing that you just mentioned that I thought, I think that's interesting because, and maybe this is, I guess, a byproduct of, I watch all these movies. I, Marvel more than the Star Wars newer stuff, generally like them, but I honestly don't give a shit about any of the Easter egg stuff. And sometimes I feel like the insertion of the Easter eggs and sort of like the, frankly, obsession or compulsion with making sure that's in there as a fan service thing can sometimes get in the way of the actual storytelling itself. But it's clearly something that fans love. From the research that you've done, or just connecting with like Binge Mode audience and this general sort of world, is that something that you think they've sort of grown to expect, or maybe generationally have grown to expect? Because again, like I want to see all these movies and generally do, but that part of it never means anything to me. And like sometimes, to be honest, like I get annoyed when they start getting thrown in there.
Yeah, I think in part it's nostalgic, and importantly nostalgic for both a lot of viewers who think, oh, I remember watching that when I was a kid, but also for the creators. If you think about the age of the creators of the new Star Wars shows, for instance, they grew up on the original trilogy. So it's kind of like, when I was a kid playing with action figures or sports cards and saying like, oh, I can make stories out of these. Well, imagine if you had $200 million to do that, you would probably insert some references to those original action figures too. And I think the fact that they're able to do that for the most part without taking away from the story, I agree. I think like to use The Mandalorian as an example, there was one episode in I think the first season when they just went back to Tatooine because, oh, hey, that's where Luke Skywalker grew up. Okay. And that was one of the weaker episodes because it overran the story.
I will admit, I have not seen season 2 of The Mandalorian. I've heard from a lot of people that season 2 was better than season 1. Mm-hmm. Season 1 for me started out really cool for like the first couple episodes. And then, to be honest, it felt like a travelogue of the galaxy. I felt like I was with like a Boba Fett travel agent, just like going around from place to place. Because like half the time I'm like, I don't even understand why you went to this planet. Like I don't get what you're doing. Like it just seems like you're driving around, like having to fix your ship, probably because you're overusing it, driving to different places for no particular reason. Like, and you're supposed to be hiding Yoda, but it seems like you're flying all over the place with them. Like I didn't understand exactly what they were doing with that.
I think one of the difficulties that both the Star Wars shows and the Marvel shows will face going forward is finding the balance between making the show itself interesting as its own product versus tying it into the wider universe.
Yes.
The fact that the Marvel shows now will be tying into the movies, I think you will get that same tension of how much do we make this an episode of an Adventure of the Week episode versus incorporating these other characters from the wider Star Wars or Marvel universes. You're seeing the same tension in the WandaVision show right now, the first Marvel offering, which is it started out as a very contained product. And then as the season has progressed, has kind of drawn in these outside universe influences. And I think for the most part, the show has succeeded in balancing those two demands, but will Marvel and will Star Wars, or so Disney overall, will every show be able to maintain that balance successfully? Probably not. So what happens when the first show fails at that effort? Does that kind of sour people on the larger project?
Well, I think that goes back to why Rogue One is good, is because especially by the movie standards, like you only have, there are only a few rules in that movie that needed to be followed. It needed to end on the transport so that the plans get there so you can have, episode 4. So that needs to happen. And then everyone has to die.
Everyone has to die.
Those are the only things that have to happen in this movie, because otherwise we're going to be wondering where the hell were these people in the other movies. They all have to die. So if you can accomplish those two things, you can kind of do whatever you want. You have all of these characters that, as long as you're willing to kill them at the end, you can create a universe. You don't have to have Jedis. You don't have to have this. You don't have to have that. And I also think that's what's successful about The Mandalorian in a lot of ways, is even with sort of Boba Fett, when I was sort of confused as to how he got out of that pit, and a friend of mine explained it to me. But like, you know, there's a lot going on there where you don't have to include, I don't know, Luke Skywalker until they
Well,
do.
the thing with Boba Fett is that was included to set up a Boba Fett show. And I think that's where, like, at some point it is going to be holding up so much on its back. Does it sag under its own weight? I didn't love the Boba Fett inclusion in The Mandalorian, but I'll say, you mentioned Rogue One, and I am not a huge Easter egg person, particularly. Like, I'm not the kind of person who will seek out those 19 Easter eggs you might have missed in X episode piece. Those are great SEO on those pieces, but I don't seek those out yet. At the same time, in Rogue One, when Darth Vader shows up, I was like, oh my God, in the theater. So, you know, I'm a sucker too, I guess.
There's a whole section at BuzzFeed that's dedicated to that. 20 Easter eggs you missed in this episode of WandaVision.
They're useful. If I'm writing about it or doing research for the podcast, it's useful, and I'm glad other people who really know the comics well are doing them. It's just not like I said, or like you said, it's not my favorite way of consuming that content.
What's the stuff that you're looking forward to most, either with the future Star Wars content, future Marvel? I mean, it was either at the end of 2020 or beginning 2021. There was that massive Disney Plus announcement where they had, like, I don't know, like 2 billion projects from all these different properties. Like, what do you think is actually going to be the coolest, or you're just most curious to see how they do it? I'm
most interested in seeing how the weird stuff translates. Yes. I think the advantage of having a lot of different TV shows running at once is you can probably afford to experiment with one or two, because if one falters, if you have 3 others that are really good, then you can afford to take more risks. So I'm excited to see the experimentation.
What's weird? What are the weird ones?
Oh gosh. So I think there are a couple Star Wars ones that are supposed to be, so most of the Star Wars shows they announced are kind of around the same time frame as the original trilogy or the new trilogy, kind of within the 30-year span in which most of the Star Wars universe has taken place so far. And I believe there's one show that's supposed to happen that's like, 10,000 years in the past, and seeing how they differentiate that from the Star Wars we know, I think will be really interesting. On the Marvel side, frankly, understanding from like the heavier comic book readers at the Ringer that a couple of the superheroes they announced are much newer. So if you think about, like, Captain America has been around for almost 100 years at this point in the comic books, and they have some other superheroes they've announced, like Miss Marvel, I think, is one, who is like a young girl who was only introduced in the comics canon within the last couple decades. So a much more modern look at superheroism, kind of, within the universe. She grew up knowing that superheroes already existed, and I'm kind of interested in how that intergenerational play goes.
I mean, it's fun that I was going to say, it's fun that you said the weird factor, because I think I was picturing The Mandalorian to end up weirder than it actually was, or like relative to some of the other stuff. Ant-Man or Ragnarok especially are definitely the quirkier, odder ones.
And Ragnarok is probably my favorite MCU movie.
Ragnarok is awesome.
So funny.
Ragnarok is fantastic. Or like, Guardians of the Galaxy is definitely weirder than some of the other ones. Like that, I think stuff like that is actually really necessary to, in a lot of ways, just to keep the creativity of it all going. Like, I understand these things are massively expensive. They are propping up studios at this point. They are propping up, in a lot of ways, like the future of movie theaters and things like that. I recognize there's a lot on the line, but like, in thinking about stuff we were going to ask you today, like, it reminded me of just Iron Man began with Robert Downey Jr., who Favreau had to fight so hard to cast in that role because he was basically uninsurable and like only a few years removed from prison and all that stuff. Like Downey was considered such a weird choice. And I'm not saying that it couldn't have worked without Downey, but the whole thing would have been way, way different without him. It began with some weirdness.
There's a concept called desirable difficulties in psychology. And I think that's kind of where this fits in of when Marvel started the MCU, they didn't have the rights to some of their most popular characters. They didn't have the rights to Spider-Man or the X-Men or the Fantastic Four. And I think in a world in which they did, maybe they try to launch the project with Spider-Man or some of these other characters. Iron Man, has been around forever, but I don't think he was an A-list comic book character until the movies came out. And I'm sure for this new generation, he is now. But I think the fact that they had to adjust to having some of these weird characters, you mentioned Guardians of the Galaxy, who were, I don't know, a D-list comic book character before that.
I didn't even know it was a comic book.
Yeah.
Aside from Marvel.
And the fact that they had to choose from these characters, I think allowed them to take more risks early on. And I hope that as they've had these multi-billion-dollar movies and are now the biggest and most successful franchise in Hollywood history, that they don't lose what made that special early on and keep taking risks.
Before we let you go, I want to have a quick conversation about Fernando Tatis Jr. And we can just do it while we watch. We don't have to hear it. We can just watch Fernando Tatis do really cool shit. So we'll just watch that while this happens. You wrote...
We're going to take down your banner, no offense. It's just so people can see.
Right. You wrote a great story about Tatis after he signed that $340 million deal with the Padres, that huge 14-year extension. How important is he to the future of baseball, of making baseball seem cool again to people?
To the extent that any one person can be, I think he's the most important. Mike Trout is the best player in the game, but he hasn't shown much interest in necessarily being the face, and all power to him. He seems to enjoy his life just hitting a lot of home runs and enjoying the weather and watching Eagles games. And that seems like a great life if you can get it. But Tatis, I think, has displayed both with his on-field enthusiasm and with things like becoming the cover athlete for the new MLB video game, that he is interested in having it all, basically. And he has the talent for it. I mentioned in my piece that among players through his young age, it's basically Tatis and Trout and a bunch of Hall of Famers. And he's a shortstop hitting that well. So he certainly has the talent for it. And now he has the chance to be the kind of one-town superstar by signing this extension. I saw some people say oh, this isn't a good thing because he will never now go to the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Red Sox. But I think it's easy enough to watch basically any team's games now that doesn't really matter. I'd also point to the fact that the coolest baseball player of the last half century was Ken Griffey Jr., who played in Seattle for the entire span of his career when he was the coolest player. So I don't think that's as prohibitive as some people make it out to be. And if you look at the Padres roster, I think for the next few years, they are going to be neck and neck with the Dodgers as the most fun rivalry in baseball. And that can only be good for the game.
Yeah, you talked before earlier about just Mike Trout and, the reluctance to show off personality and, baseball looking for a player like that. And I think there is a lot of hope that Tatis can be that guy. And he certainly, if not, he seems wired for that sort of thing. But I wonder too, especially as football and basketball have taken so much prominence, at least in America, among the big four, part of the issue you may have in baseball with creating stars is just the relative limitations that one player can have towards winning, versus the way, a lot of players can have a direct control in the NBA or in the NFL. It's always going to go back to quarterbacks. And that type of direct control is something that is always marketable. You can be an incredible baseball player. It doesn't change the fact that you'll get, if you're lucky, you'll bat 5 times. 95% of the balls don't get hit towards you. there's a lot of time spent in baseball standing around doing nothing. And that can be difficult with promoting stars and creating stars.
I think October is so important there because October is really the only time when everyone's watching the same game at once. Baseball is such a localized sport. You watch your own team every night. And I think that's why the fact that the Padres are good is so important here. The problem with Trout's celebrity is partly his own personal feelings about it, I think, but also just the fact that the Angels haven't won. And if the Angels were in the playoffs every year, I bet he would be a bigger star, whether he wanted it or not. That's why Derek Jeter, it was so famous. He played in New York, sure, but he also was on a World Series team for the first half of his career, basically. So I think the Padres being this good is really important, and their GM is the most aggressive GM in the game. They made so many improvements this winter to a team that was already quite good and very young and has a lot of prospects still on the way, that I think that's one of the advantages Tatis has over maybe some other candidates for this role. The Padres are going to be good, so he'll be playing in October and be exciting for a lot of fans at once.
Do you think it matters that he's, a guy with a Latin name? He plays with a way that, you put clips up and, he's tagged up from third and scored from home on a pop-up to the second baseman, I think it was. He had some just epic bat flips in the playoffs last year, like stuff that doesn't follow the unwritten rules of baseball and all that kind of stuff. How much do you think that helps with younger people, but also might meet resistance with sort of the baseball old guard that it seems so protective of all the bullshit that I think frankly holds baseball back?
I was almost pleasantly surprised last year when there was the brouhaha over Tatis swinging at a 3-0 pitch, which wasn't even an unwritten rule I knew existed. And I think what happened was, I believe it was Texas they were playing. Texas got upset that day. And then basically all of the discourse said Texas was wrong. You didn't have the spate of old analysts saying, no, actually Tatis was disrespecting the game. I think that was a turning point in my understanding of where the game is headed now. Frankly, I think the game could use more players like that, more excitement, more bat flips. And MLB is showing that with its let the kids play marketing. I think almost the entire generation of young 20-something superstars plays that way. Ronald Acuna admires his home runs. Juan Soto has his little antagonistic step toward the pitcher when he takes a pitch. And you have Tatis. And I think the fact that basically the entire young generation is playing this way means we'll be seeing it more and more accepted going forward, because that's where all the best players are going to be.
I hope so. Just like, I know the Cardinals got mad at him in the playoffs. Andy and I, again, both from St. Louis. We, big fans of the Cardinals, still root for them, all that. The Cardinals are not fun. The Cardinals as an organization are not fun. They don't believe in fun. They don't believe in flipping bats. They don't believe in any of the things that would make baseball more appealing.
There was a period where their shortstop literally would do a backflip on the way to the field, on the way to his spot on the
Only
field.
On opening day, though.
Right, but Ozzie Smith became known for doing a damn bat flip. And I mean, a backflip, not a bat flip, a backflip. And that was widely accepted and, again, celebrated. It's weird where these cultural shifts end up happening. I mean, look, that 82 team that won the World Series, they were incredibly fun. I mean, that was just an incredibly entertaining era of baseball to watch. Half that team was, let's just say, partying a lot.
And I think part of it is about reputation. It's kind of a catch-22, but if Ozzie hadn't been Ozzie, then he probably wouldn't have been allowed to do the backflips. And the same is probably true of Tatis. The fact that he's so good kind of lets him get away with that and makes it more accepted.
You okay, Brian?
Yeah, sorry. My thing came unplugged. I just have one more question. I don't know if we were at a natural pause. How close are the Padres to the Dodgers?
I think they're extraordinarily close. I would say, I don't know what the odds say right now, but 60-40, which in a sample size of 1 is really close. I think a lot of it will probably just come down to which team can stay healthy. The Dodgers, because of their, I think, ability to spend and the depth they've just built up over many years, have more in reserve, if guys get injured, they have like 9 deep, really good starting pitchers. But if you just take the 1 to 25 rosters right now, I would take the Dodgers by a hair. I think they're the 2 best teams in baseball right now, and it's not particularly.
But that puts you in a little bit of an outlier stat. I mean, most people think the Padres are good, but there's still a pretty sizable gap or decent sized gap, I should say, between them and the Dodgers. So do you consider yourself more Padres forward than other people?
I was big on the Padres last year, actually. So I got it early. Yeah. So I just looked, according to the Fangraphs playoff
We don't
odds,
judge.
It says they're separated by 3 games right now, which over 162 games, preseason projections, that's pretty close. And I think the advantage that San Diego has is they also have really good prospects, and they're willing to build up kind of the top tier talent that you need to take on the Dodgers. It's been a fun arms race because the Dodgers obviously entered the offseason better. So the Padres said, okay, we'll trade for Darvish and Snell on the same day. And the Dodgers said, okay, then we'll sign Trevor Bauer and re-sign Justin Turner. And so now the Padres said, okay, we'll re-sign Jurickson Profar, which he's not on the same level, but just kind of gives them the depth that the Dodgers have 1 to 25. And I think the Padres are almost using the Dodgers as a model, which is always fun. It reminds me of the Yankees-Red Sox series of the early 2000s when they had easily the best rivalry in the sport.
All right, Zach Kram, it is now 1:00 in the morning where you are. We're going to let you go. You have done your service to this show.
Go back into the wild. We're releasing you.
You've done your service to the show. We really appreciate it. You check out all of Zach's stuff at The Ringer. He writes about Major League Baseball. He writes about the NBA and does great work on all that stuff. And then go listen to Binge Mode because he's doing all the real work while these frontliners at The Ringer get all the credit.
All they do is record everything and read everything, and no work at all.
No,
well, you're the guy behind the guy. That's the way it works. I appreciate the time, man. It was great meeting you.
It's fun. It was good to meet you.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Tomorrow, Trayvon Edwards is going to join us. That'll be a lot of fun. We'll do a lot of NBA and get in some cultural stuff as well. Steve Mason on Friday. We're going to mock him because he has to pre-tape, even though he is on the West Coast, because 10 o'clock is too late for him because he's on an old
Friday
person. On a
night.
Friday. He is an old man.
Yes,
all right. Thanks again to Zach. We'll see everybody tomorrow.